Okay, so why do we want to talk about artificial intelligence at all? I mean, the first thing to say about AI is that it's actually technically not that complicated, but it is really big. When we're talking about AI in some loose terms at the moment, you're really only talking about one thing, which is generative models. This is what we've basically come to label as AI. There's no specific technology that fundamentally is artificial intelligence. A lot of other things that are called AI aren't even slightly related to it. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're really just talking about these generative systems because that's the common lingo at the moment. Now, in terms of investment, the amounts of money that are being put into AI should make your head spin. Trump's new alliance with the sort of Silicon Valley tech bros, obviously they would used to mutually hate each other, is seeing $500 billion invested into what they're calling Project Stargate, which is a glorified name for building more data centers. The EU had a summit this week, which was ostensibly about AI regulation, although they've really wound back on that a lot because they want to expand AI, and they've pledged something to the order of $200 billion. And here in Britain, just for comic relief, Keir Starmer has now become the 5th Prime Minister to claim that the United Kingdom is going to become a world leader in AI, although he has absolutely no idea how he's going to accomplish that. There's lots of mad claims made about what generative AI specifically, or AI as a sort of nebulous concept, may be capable of. A lot of these really are so silly, they're not really worth going into. We could, if you want, to talk about the myth of artificial general intelligence, which is never going to happen. And then from that, you get all of very silly ideas like singularities and runaway AI. They're not hugely important. I'm going to assume that a lot of you have either played with a generative system or had one foisted upon you. Like a lot of the search engines are running AI queries, whether you like it or not. I'm also going to assume that a lot of you probably aren't huge fans. That's because the public at large is generally pretty negative about AI. And ironically, for a marketing term, marketing research shows that the public is getting less and less keen on AI and anything to do with it. Products that are advertised as having AI features are considered less desirable than products that do not. This is pretty ironic, given just the force of each push, but we'll get back to that. There is a thing going on there that says a lot about capitalism. Beyond how people feel about AI as a sort of thing introduced into your life, there are a lot of genuine reasons to be concerned about it that don't have to do with silly science fiction concepts. The first one is purely its externalities. AI relies on huge data centers that scrape data from out across the internet, bundle it all together into complex webs of statistical information. And then the output is basically a sort of random generation process in which they turn an input that you put in, a command line, you make that into a set of ciphers for statistical information, and then try and work out what a human being, if they'd been given that command line, would have returned to you. It's not actually that complicated on a technical level. It just requires these massive data centers filled with data, filled with computer equipment that are consuming huge amounts of energy. The quantities of energy involved are really quite terrifying. They're starting to fly in the face of any efforts we're making as a society in terms of decarbonisation. Of course, the other thing that these computers do while they're consuming all this energy is churn that energy back out into the environment as heat. That means they get running very hot and they need to be cooled. So data centers also consuming massive amounts of water. This is also becoming a serious ecological problem in territories where a lot of data centers have been built, and will be a concern in this country if we expand data centers here. Finally, something we often tend to forget about electronics is that a lot of it just ends up as electronic waste. Data centers are going to become a huge source, potentially very hazardous refuse in the near future. So, public's kind of gone sour on this thing. There's a lot of things to dislike about it. Interestingly, capitalists are also, not as unified about it as news reports might suggest. In terms of actual uptake, it is currently estimated that under 10% of businesses use any generative AI system for any actual practical purpose. And only a further 10% beyond that are even looking at trying to use generative AI for any purpose. So even if that is fully realized, 20% of businesses are really using this thing? It does not feel as revolutionary as the rhetoric would suggest. There's also looming fears about the long-term commercial viability of it. Now, Goldman Sachs, obviously no friends to the left, put out a really damning report last summer in which they gave it a self-explanatory title: Gen AI, too much spend, too little benefit. You can pull that off the internet, and it explains in very simple terms that these hundreds of billions of dollars that are going into AI are not matched by any realizable commercial return. Basically, the Goldman Sachs do not see a path to getting this thing to be cash positive. They don't think that it's feasible. And obviously, since Goldman Sachs put out that report, there have been now two major stock market shocks specifically associated with AI. One came out a week just after they released that report, in which a number of investors got spooked as to whether or not their shares in AI companies were actually worth anything, and $600 billion disappeared off the US stock market in 1 week. They managed to, steady the ship, persuade some of these investors, which are, sovereign wealth funds, Gulf State oil money, and so on, persuade them to, get back on board. But then another shock happened just a few weeks ago, when a Chinese upstart called DeepSeek launched their app, which led to a $2 trillion drop coming off the US stock market. That's the biggest single drop in stock market history, because that's the biggest disappearance of capital's value ever recorded. So we've got a strange thing going on here. We've got the tech sector constantly doubling down on this thing, even though there is widespread skepticism that it's going to return a profit, and generally the public are getting more and more negative about it, for mostly very rational reasons. The reason for this is that basically capitalism doesn't actually do what we're supposed to believe it does. We're supposed to believe that the capitalist profit motive would always drive businesses to produce products that deliver the greatest value to end users, and this is where the money would come from to ultimately investors. The thing is that frequently isn't the way it works. In the approximate case of the tech sector as we know it, it's a series of companies. Usually, we talk about the Magnificent Seven, so NVIDIA, the hardware company, and the software platforms like Facebook, OpenAI, Google, and so on. Now, they blew up huge in very specific circumstances. Those were that at the end of the 2000s, a crisis in the banking sector had been rectified by dropping interest rates to almost nothing, while you had a lot of big funds built up around the end, particularly around the fossil fuel sector and so on, looking for things to invest in. And there'd been a sudden rapid change in technology. So the development of these things, new breakthroughs in software, substantially improved processing capacity and so on, that meant that investing in software looked like a really rational thing to do. And across the 2010s, you do get this extremely rapid change. That kind of summarizes Web 2.0, but it was one of the most accelerated transformations in communication technology in human history. Bigger than television, bigger than the telephone, probably bigger than television. I would say probably Web 2.0 was the biggest change in the way that information is distributed, probably since the printing press, essentially before capitalism had even begun. So it's growing and growing and growing. They're just taking all this investment money. They have a model which they call the blitz scale, which is where they just get products out there and worry about product, make them ubiquitous, get everybody onto Facebook, get everybody onto Twitter, get everybody doing ride sharing and the gig economy, get everybody onto streaming, basically make people completely transform the way that they're communicating with people, doing business, buying things, buying products, buying services, and worry about the profitability thing afterwards, because we can always get more investment money, and we don't currently have to pay anybody back much because interest rates are so low. The thing is that came crashing down roughly around the time of the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic had a lot of was a massive shock to the capital system, much bigger than the banking crisis at the end of the 2000s. Amongst its effects is that it slowed down globalization, in fact, it's arguably reversed globalization, and relatedly to that, has brought back interest rates and inflation in a big way. All of a sudden, taking on loads and loads of debt becomes much more problematic than it was 15 years earlier. In order to get out of the hole that they were increasingly falling into, the tech sector did return to the trick that had worked before. It just appealed for more and more investment money. And oh boy, did they invest in some wacky things over the course of the last 5 years. I think it's probably worth just chewing over because it was such a blur. It's worth chewing over some of the things that the tech sector blew money on. So in 2021, while we were all still in lockdown, you may remember the brief and very surreal craze of celebrities trading badly drawn pictures of monkeys. This was the result of a crazy investment bubble. So the technology of blockchain being created, it enabled you to financialize basically a non-existing existing thing as if it were a tradable product. And Silicon Valley investors, desperate for somewhere to put their money to keep the machines spinning, gave a company called Yuga Labs $4 billion to develop badly drawn pictures of monkeys. Within 12 months, all that investment had disappeared. Cryptocurrency is, of course, the better known use of blockchain technology. That went absolutely mad in the same period. In 2019, a company called FTX was launched to kind of mainstream the use of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin. Within 3 years, that had acquired a valuation of $32 billion. And the head of FTX was appearing on panels with world leaders talking about how cryptocurrency was going to come into everybody's lives and revolutionize the way we do finances. Within 6 months, the company had been declared bankrupt, and he is now in prison for fraud. The metaverse is one that a lot of you probably can't even remember happened, but Facebook actually changed its name to Meta and committed $14 billion to creating a so-called virtual world that we were all apparently going to live in. This was quietly binned and abandoned about 18 months later. It just doesn't exist now. And then there's been attempts to get excitement about a raft of other sort of very silly technologies, including things like Elon Musk's self-driving cars, which are never going to be road legal, and like a whole bunch of other sort of pointless things which have come and gone. And really left very little impact. AI, when you look back over the history of just like weird, pointless failed products that they bring to market and then can't get anybody to actually use, it makes kind of more historic sense to understand why they've gone so mad for AI. At least this one, they have got people to use. People don't like it very much. It's questionable if it's producing anything of particular value, but it does look like a stable investment. So it's keeping the investment money flowing in. Apologists for capitalism, as I say, would like us to believe that that the profit motive will always reward the best possible production. But it's just but you can see here it's just not the case. Investors are rewarding a series of failed products which are going out to market, not actually returning products, and then they're just doubling down. It's not it's extremely irrational, but it's not actually that unusual in the history of capitalism. I think the strongest analogy that is often made to the tech sector at the moment is probably the railways in the 19th century. So railroads exploded across North America and Europe at the end of the 19th century for very similar reasons. There was a huge hype cycle. There was a huge amount of hype about railways. You've got to remember how radical it would have seemed to have these huge machines moving thousands of people and tons of goods around the world at that period, and it was something that capitalists could put large amounts of investment in to make it look like they were doing something with their money. By the end of the 19th century, most of these railroads, which were completely unable to realize profits that matched those investments, had collapsed, been bailed out by the public sector, and made money for a small number of capitalists who, despite the fact that their businesses had all failed. Investment bubbles are not an aberration within capitalism. There's something that capitalism actually does a lot and often, going right back to the start of capitalism in the history of this country, when in fact there was an investment bubble around the slave trade. We usually euphemistically refer to that as the South Sea bubble, but that was ultimately a very similar process in which the profitability of those endeavors had been badly overestimated in order to keep investment money flowing in. I think I am being able to wrap up. I mean the conclusion of this in a nutshell basically is, yes, it is time to start saying that enough is enough with AI, but there are the reason why it's enough that we should be saying we don't want any more of this is completely to discard all the sort of silly nonsense that we've heard about, kind of Terminator style scenarios or things like that, and actually to just say that the world-changing sums of money should be put into things that are actually of social and ecological benefit, not simply to keep failing businesses going.